and family, and let's get ready to start the year 2023. And a reminder that the long-range plan meeting is tomorrow at noon. I'm off a day because I think it's Monday because we were off. So this is Tuesday and it's tomorrow. Just remind everybody. So I'm calling this meeting to order. Douglas Center, and they're serving lunch to us. Turning it over to Reagan.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy New Year, everyone. Couple of items of business, as this is the agenda meeting. Part of the purpose of it is to set your agenda for next week. So first and foremost, I had intended to potentially add an item this evening. It is not going to be ready for next Tuesday, but just to give council a heads up, because it may be one that I ask for action on at the work session later this month. The town was informed late last year that we were going to have some issues with our mobile 311 system, which is basically our work order system utilized by a lot of the departments. I'll make a long story very short. Our crack IT staff has done a wonderful job in working with the Moore County IT staff, who were very open and willing to work on a project that has allowed Moore County to essentially host our mobile 311 system. So it's up, it's running, we're still able to perform work orders and all that good stuff. What we will need to do is pass a simple intergovernmental agreement between Moore County and Southern Pines that says essentially they host it and sets out the responsibilities of both parties. That language is about 90% complete. Mac's been reviewing it. We've got one small item that Nedra would like to have addressed with the IT director in Moore County. Again, with holiday schedules being what they are, not confident that it'll be ready to go for next Tuesday, so it is likely something you'll see at the work session. But I did want to give you a heads up on that, and also thank Moore County publicly for working with us to address that issue. Second item I have this evening for potential addition to your agenda would be a consent agenda item for a planning board appointment to the ETJ seat. You all received the application of an individual that I believe a couple of you have already spoke with, Ms. Harvey. And if council is in agreement, we'll have her added to the consent agenda for next week for appointment to that ETJ seat. Everybody's good with that?
Yeah.
Another item that did not make this agenda, however, it's one that we can add either to the consent agenda or we can simply add as an action item, depending on whether you're all in agreement or not, is we did not add the council organization that we've been doing annually. You may all recall we did it at the agenda meeting when two of you were sworn in following an election. Clearly, there was not an election this past year. Councils in past years have or have not taken action in the non-election year to make these appointments. We did start a number of years back to, at least for consistency's purposes, even if it's just to reappoint everybody that was already appointed, at least take some form of action. So I would like to add that to next week's agenda. Those positions, to remind you, would be your mayor pro tem, which Councilman Murphy is currently filling, the treasurer, which Councilman Pate fills, the vice treasurer, which Taylor was appointed to, the partners in progress seat that Carol holds, and then a Triangle J Council of Governments seat and alternate, which Carol holds the seat and Bill is the alternate for. So again, if everybody around the table says we're all good with what we're doing, continue another year, we can just throw all those on the consent agenda. If you'd prefer to go through a more lengthy nomination and second and appointment process, we can make it an action item on next week's agenda. So,
Are you all good with the status quo? Yeah. If we're good with the status quo, let's just put it on the consent agenda. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you all. We'll put that on next week. And then the final item I had, and I think Bill, who was kind enough to call earlier today, has to do with the overall order of the agenda next week. You'll recall we began late last year and intended to continue with the process of separating your QJ items from your legislative items on next week's business agenda. They don't appear that way here, but that would ultimately be how they appear. Bill has let me know, and I would welcome him to say whatever he may have planned to say, that he will be asking for an abstention on all three of the QJ items before you next week, being the Country Club, the Mid-South modifications, and the Carapines Phases 3B and 4. Based on that, what I would request of council or recommend to council is that we go ahead and dispose of the consent agenda, the couple of action items that we will have, and the legislative hearing that Bill can be a part of. And that way, then he can excuse himself, not have to worry about when to return in order to perform the rest of council business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
We'll do-
If everybody's in order or in agreement with that concept.
4D first, and then just go from 4D down first?
Probably, I'd suggest we start sort of with consent agenda, start with 6.
Start with 6.
5 will become 2, then we'll do the legislative, and then we can excuse Bill and move into the QJ.
Okay.
Again, that assumes you all end up agreeing with his request, and, because there will need to be a vote taken on that. Is that best taken this evening, Mac, just to be way above board and? Okay.
So,
Okay, and I'll let Bill address his reasoning and such when we get to that portion of the agenda. But everybody kind of agrees with that approach.
that makes sense.
Then in that case, that is everything I had until we get to items on the agenda that I can fill in the blanks with, Mayor, if you'd like to continue with the rest of the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So we're reviewing the public hearing applications, and as we know, as you said, we have a continuance for SU 0722, which is a QJ, obviously, so we can't really discuss that. SU 0622, Mid-South modifications, again, quasi-judicial, so mum's the word.
I would ask, however, on that one and the next one, that you take separate votes excusing Councilman Pate if
Oh,
you
okay.
so choose to do.
Because you've already been excused from the first one. So on SU 0622, I need a motion to recuse.
For those two, I mean, I've talked to Mac about it for similar reasons and what I'm required ethically to do based on just conflicts I have to ask for.
So the conflicts are within your law office?
Yeah, it's
is that
just
what- okay.
professional conflicts
Okay.
mandate me to ask for recusal.
Move that Bill Pate be recused from the following,
This one, and
yes, B and C.
Well, Mac, you want us to vote on those separately? Is that what you want? Do you want
Separately or?
a motion to,
okay.
okay. Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Be that way, Bill. Okay. So, as we just said, the Mid-South modifications, that's a quasi-judicial, so we can't really discuss that one. And Carapines Phases 3B and 4, PD 1222 is another quasi. So, mum's the word on that one, too.
And will those be presented in the agenda in the order in which they appear now, ABC? Or is there any reason to modify that, just as far as giving people notice of what we're doing?
I would say we should, because one of the continuance, they should be first.
Correct?
You know,
I agree. No, I'm not arguing. I'm just saying, is there any reason to, is there any reason to shuffle it? Does anybody have any reason to
okay.
shuffle?
So the next is text amendments to the UDO. There's amendments over 9 topics. I think you all can know how to read.
Did anybody have any initial questions of planning staff on those, or anything we can bring additional information on next week? Clearly, there'll be a presentation for any public present or those viewing online, but
I like the way it's presented, that you cross all out and you put it over here and why you did it and what it is, which is very helpful.
I apologize for the UDO is in the packet twice because the first time it's attached to the staff report and it has the markup and it has the margin comments. Then because, although it's a relatively minor list of topics, each topic has tentacles that go out and touch a lot of different sections of the UDO with very minor things. So rather than carve out all those pages and try to attach them, we just attached a whole copy of the UDO. And then what happened is the ordinance is going to do the same thing. And when I forwarded the ordinance to Beth, I failed to do an adequate job of communicating, hey, don't put the UDO in the packet again a second time. And so that's why I wound up in there twice. We'll get it down to one time.
Yeah, because when you look and you have 1,200 and something pages, you think, 1,225, you think, this could be a long long period of time.
I appreciate the thought that you all have put into the changes. I think it will make things be a lot smoother. Thank
There
you.
is always better.
One about awnings in there too.
I'm
Thank
pumped.
Saw that, yeah.
I know, I agree with Carol on the, I appreciate the red line version where it's highlighted and then specifics put out to the side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. The proposed action items for next week is an architectural review on Fort Bragg Federal Credit Union building. I see that we have some people here. Someone with a coat.
Yes, I feel very fashionable.
I know.
Hi, everybody.
How are you? Welcome.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Okay, so I'll go over this. We've got Fort Bragg Federal Credit Union. We've got the Fort Bragg Federal Credit Union over there on Brucewood Road. I'm sure you're familiar with the Southern Pines Village. That's where Kohl's is, and a bunch of other retail areas. This is sandwiched in between a couple different, a hotel and a senior living facility. I'll talk about those a little bit more going forward, but hopefully that image gives you, helps you orient yourself a bit. So my typical agenda you guys are familiar with now. We've got Fort Bragg Federal Credit Union. Our applicant for this is Mr. Kuntz with Kuntz and Jones Design. Our zoning for this is general business, the Southern Pines Village Conditional District. And this specific area, I'll show you a map in a second, is for office and neighborhood business uses only, of which a bank is within an allowed use. And it applies the general business standards. So we'll go through that. And this in the future land use map is a mixed use, traditional mixed use. So here's the 1992 version of the Southern Pines Village. You know, be interested to ask if it looks like now like what you think it should have according to this master plan. But right there in the section E that shows what I had previously mentioned, we have neighborhood business and office uses within general business, you know, general requirements and standards. So let's look at the existing building and lot. So kind of just for reference, I thought it was interesting to talk a little bit about contours, the elevation of the area. You can see the higher elevations in the northeast portion of the image and goes southwest. So you can see that we have quite a bit of a gradient on this site, and the applicant is done a lot of different design approaches to address that, including a retaining wall. But just wanted to mention that. We've got here, this is the street view from Google on Brucewood. You can see we've got that median there and the property which is currently forested. And this is viewing north towards Morganton Road. We've got the Residence Inn Marriott to the south. Across the street is the cinema. And then north is the Terra Bella Southern Pines.
Those of you who've been on council a while, this is where the storage units were proposed several years ago
Yes, good point.
in the curve, just so you can kind of get a point of reference.
Right, that's right. And this is viewing south towards 15501. You can just see a very forested lot. Right behind it is a residential area, and there's a 100-foot buffer, tree line buffer that is required per that master plan that I just showed you. And just to, you know, kind of see aerially the adjacent parcels that are there, you got a lot of retail, the cinemas, Lowe's Foods. The town property is just further east on Morganton. But yes, lots of development going on there. So here's our proposed building. We've got just shy of 6,000 square feet in this Fort Bragg Federal Credit Union, which is bank. They're proposing 3 teller lanes, an enclosed dumpster, and 3 signs. And so this is the elevation, they call it the east elevation, which is what's facing Brucewood Road.
From this, you can see where the teller lanes are going to go. You can see the glass to brick to, different masonry ratios going on. There is no entry on the front, the street-facing facade, which we'll get to in a second. This is what the rendering has for that corner there. And now we're looking at the north elevation, which is the right elevation, which faces Tarabella. That has the two customer entries located there, about 96 feet apart. And again, lots of windows and brick being the primary building material. I wanted to mention I have some of these highlighted, those little bubbles, those call-outs, because I'm not quite sure what the A301, those numbers are referring to, but I'm sure Mr. Kuntz will be able to address that shortly. And that's the rendering of the customer entrance, which is, again, the right elevation, which you guys have all seen. So this is looking south, which is the left elevation. That's where the teller lanes are going to be there. Again, you can see different changing in roof line, those windows. And this is the rear elevation. So site plan. So this is how it's laid out. You can see there that what they call the north elevation is that right elevation facing Tarabella. That's where their entries are going to be. That's where most of the parking is located. Parking also located in the rear, those teller lanes on the left elevation, with landscaping, which I'll show you here shortly too. And again, that retaining wall I mentioned and its orientation towards Brucewood. Okay, so here we're talking about consistency with 226.7. So those are the 4 different criteria that we have to look through that lens. So the CLRP consistency, I didn't find any issues. The UDO commercial design and zoning standards conformity, that's letter B. There are 4 different sections that really apply to this project. The general business section, since the standards and requirements are within that section. 410, which we'll get to in a short bit. 5.8 drive-through, since this has a teller lane, and outdoor storage, since they have a dumpster. And of course, the original master plan for the conditional district. So I wrote there that I had insufficient information to really determine whether it conforms with the standards, just because the information was incomplete when we received it. On letter C, we've had prior development approval precedence consistency, which is just my shorthand way of saying the whole thing. Which is this consistent with other applications we've gotten for architectural reviews? And my answer, based on my very short time being here, would be no. I've seen much more robust applications that included more information, which is easier for me to come to a determination and some sort of recommendation for the council. So I just said, compared to what I've seen so far, it could have been better. And in letter D, compatibility with the neighborhood character, I would say it's consistent with the Southern Pines Village. So now talking about 410, those design requirements. I highlighted here the ones that are of concern, and you'll notice that of our 10 design standards, one of them doesn't apply, and all other 9 will appear on this list. Of concerns, just mainly because I didn't have enough information on certain things, but I'll get to that shortly. So the first thing would be here, building orientation entries. I mentioned to you guys, and I showed you the images of the entries being on the right elevation rather than the street-facing facade, which is non-compliant, so they would need a deviation for that. I did get confirmation from Mr. Kuntz about the distance between the entries, and it is within less than 150 feet, which is the requirement, so no issue there. So that deviation is pretty simple and straightforward, whether or not you guys want to allow the entry to be on the right elevation. And moving down to building dimensions, I said that the compliance is going to be determined mainly because I didn't have the widths of segments to be able to, mathematically confirm that they're not, the widths aren't more than twice the height, but visually, it's pretty easy to say that they're not. They're not too wide. They're, they're segmented enough to the point where those segments make it show that you have a pretty compliant structure, even without having those dimensions on the rendering in the drawings. So I have there for letter C, building materials, that they are not compliant, they are aware they're not compliant, and they are requesting a deviation since they have over 20% of their elevations being stone, stucco, or other masonry that are not brick, covering each of their elevations. But I did mention there that they have between 62 and 75% brick, which is pretty close to our 80% minimum. And you can tell it is the main building material when you looked at those, from my perspective, looking at the renderings that they provided. So they do provide an equivalent appearance, I would say. And those are just the numbers for your reference. Okay. So D, E, and G are next in line. So windows, I got confirmation from Mr. Kunz just this afternoon that they will not be clear. They will be tinted gray per North Carolina energy codes. I know that's a conversation item that comes up quite frequently. You guys do architectural reviews. So, take that as part of your decision-making process. But everything else was compliant from my evaluation. Awnings, also not compliant. They are requesting a deviation to use aluminum awnings instead of the canvas over their entries. Roofs. So my only qualm here was that they are proposing green metal roofing, and I wasn't quite sure what exactly color green they were going to use. Yeah, well, here, I'll show you. So yeah, I mean, if it's that fluorescent green, then I would say that's an intense green that we prohibit. But it also could be a dark green. So I know Mr. Kunz said that their architect is going to be bringing a sample for the public hearing. So I'm sure we'll get to see that color before you guys make a final decision on it.
Yeah, because that's not going to fly.
Yeah. So our last three here are mechanical equipment. I couldn't determine compliance, which Mr. Kunz had mentioned in his email to me this afternoon that they aren't quite sure just yet where the mechanical equipment is going to go specifically, but it won't be on the roof. It'll be somewhere on ground level, and he does say in his narrative that it will be screened to meet requirements as described in the UDO. So it's very, not as,
Again, that email to you was this morning, correct?
this afternoon at 2, yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I haven't had a chance to incorporate those comments into this presentation because this presentation was finished before then. So I had Teller lanes in there. I know that the UDO specifically calls it loading zones and garage bays, but my notes do say garbage. Garage bays, and I guess maybe this might be a question for BJ, but I use Teller lanes in this instance because that is relevant to this specific design. And I noticed in the different section, on this section on drive-through requirements, that they needed to have 4 stacking spaces for their drive-through lanes. I didn't have any information on that, so I couldn't really say whether or not they complied with that stacking lane requirement. They didn't have any color renderings for me for that side of the building to see what the Teller lanes would look like and how they'd be screened. They did provide a landscaping plan when they submitted their site plan review, which isn't part of this application, but I did provide it in your guys' packet for reference. And so to my understanding, that landscaping will be sufficient screening for that side of the building. So lastly, signage, I said couldn't be determined, but Mr. Kunz did mention to me in his email this afternoon that they do plan to apply for that separately. So I wasn't sure when I had written this whether or not that they're looking for, they were including that as part of this application or not, but they are not, even though it does show up on the site plan. Here just regarding the Teller lanes.
the information, that's, essentially all the information I have for that. And this is the landscaping plan. So you can see there's quite a few large trees and street trees on that left elevation, the south-facing elevation, to properly screen those teller lanes. And this was to show you where they plan to have the signage. So they have signage on the right elevation, the Brucewood facing elevation, and a monument sign there out front by Brucewood Road. But again, that will be coming in a separate application. So noteworthy project elements, again, 6,000 square feet approximately for a bank. They had 3 design standard deviations at the moment I wrote this, and 6 that I could not be determined. Based on the information that was provided, I emailed them, and to, play devil's advocate, this was around the holiday time, and, the application came in the holiday season, so, take that for what it's worth. But I did get an email today at 2, and I very briefly reviewed it, so I'd have to re-review, reevaluate, and update my staff report for you guys for next week.
Thanks.
Mayor, how would you feel about continuing this until staff is able to provide?
I agree,
Okay.
because there's too many gaps, because you can't do, no?
Can we go through our presentation and we can fill in all the gaps?
I think it would actually make sense to hold off on your presentation until she can make a recommendation. That way we have all the information in front of us before you come up and fill in gaps. Does that make sense? I'm open to the rest of the
What do you,
council.
what do y'all think? Because there's a lot of gaps.
A lot of gaps. I agree with Taylor. I really wish that we,
Wait, there really aren't?
There really aren't.
well,
It's really 3 deviations that we're asking for. And one is an awning, which you've approved multiple times. Another is, we have the colors here tonight. We have all those things here tonight for you to review and to make recommendations on. We also have the entry area, which isn't going to change, which is the other deviation we're asking for. And then there's the third deviation of,
Pull that slide back, go back a
Yeah.
slide.
You said it isn't going to change, it's always going to, you want it to be a side entry?
we want it to be a side entry specifically from a wayfinding perspective and some other reasons. There are a lot of reasons why to do that with orienting from the entry in the parking lot. There are lots of reasons to do that. And then the building orientation, the building materials, which we've asked for, we have over 85% of the building is masonry material. And that doesn't include the stucco. That is only brick and stone. So that's the other deviation that we're requesting. So it says 3 deviations, and we have the information here tonight that we can present and walk through. So there's really not a lot that would change as a result of that.
I think if we're asking our staff to make a recommendation, I feel like it's almost rude to ask for you to do all this work and get a recommendation and not have the ability to do that. And for us to make a decision here. I think it makes sense to continue it.
I agree. I agree.
And just, the reason it came back today is because I was sick for 4 days and out the week before Christmas. And the 22nd, when that email came, I was out sick. Didn't see it until today.
that. I think that's fair. Just
I hope you're better now. Did you have the big COVID?
Oh, no, I did not have COVID.
You're the only one. Everybody I know seems to have gotten it.
Yeah.
What's the, as far as like coming back, are we saying they're going to have all this by a week from today or like next, when do we anticipate they're getting the stuff so that Elena can review it?
It was submitted today, so.
Just for how, when we continue these, is it always like
Does it continue to the next month?
next month or is it like to next week? It's usually like we'd say, oh, you don't need to come back or you do. And Tuesday would be more recap of today, or do we do that at Tuesday? Like the full, like, how do we usually do that?
Trying to come back next month.
My suggestion would be next month. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to give staff time to put together a recommendation.
Thank you.
And if staff could receive reports earlier than 2:00 on the day that they're supposed to make a presentation. I understand all that, but
And
I also
normally-
understand how hard these people are working and how tough it is on them, and it's not fair for the 11th hour reports to come in. It's just not fair. So,
Thank you, we will.
We look forward to seeing you next month.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Bob. Glad you're better.
Thanks for your work.
Take that
It's not
off.
for me.
Glasses are freezing. I hate to put them back on my face.
So Reagan, will we just take that off the agenda? Okay.
That sounds
I'm whispering into a.
Good job. But you know what? If you hadn't said anything, nobody would have noticed.
It is not technically a continuation. It's just, but it'll come back when it's ready.
Coming back, yeah, okay. So with that being said, the next thing is the consent agenda for, with the approval of Resolution 1038, records retention and disposal.
So this was also a lot of pages in your packet, and this is one that Beth brought forward, and I think her memo kind of outlines it very well. Essentially, every few years, the state of North Carolina updates its record retention requirements and then asked all of us to adopt some version of it. So I think the document is in there kind of, what you will note is not a lot of changes, but an awful lot of reorganization where they've kind of taken sections and lumped them under some more general types of things. But this goes out in its entirety to each of the departments and directors, and they have to update any necessary changes. Quite a few of these are obviously in law enforcement, and any updates tend to be around things like body camera video and stuff that you're hearing about in the news. But again, if there are questions, by all means, please let us know what they are, and we'll try and get you some answers. But this is kind of a straightforward need to do to stay in line with general statute.
I've got two questions.
Sure.
So these are dated October 2021.
Yep.
So they make the change, then we have a certain amount of time for the change to be
Yeah,
implemented.
and you may have noted, I think Beth noted in her memo that we've been working from a 2019 schedule.
Okay.
So it's not every year that you're going to see this, but yeah, it's a 2021 document because that's when they created it.
Okay.
We're being asked to adopt it.
And then the other question is, on page 1100,
Oh, gee.
just under medical records, why would we have records of employee, contractor, volunteer, health, and physical examinations?
Okay,
I feel
please
like-
ask your question again, because I
Okay.
think I jumped to an answer before I heard the whole question.
Okay. So under medical records, it says clarified description to include records of employee, contractor, and volunteers. Expanded description of health and physical examinations. With HIPAA, why would we have any medical? It's all under human resource records.
Yeah, so there are certain positions that have physical requirements that we do in fact.
As soon as you said it, it makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Just when does Tess get a break? Wow.
When is what?
When does Tess get a break?
Unfortunately, not anytime soon. We're entering budget season now.
This is nuts.
No,
Birth to a CPA. There isn't any off-season anymore.
which brings us into the next series of amendments, which are all budget. And I'll get to my comment outside of budget about why Tess never really gets a break. But so the first ordinance is the Sanitary Sewer Modernization Capital Project Fund. This is actually great news. This is the $4.9 million grant. We're simply recognizing it and budgeting it. So no shocking thing there. The budget ordinance for Municipal Service District Revenue Fund. This is your MSD that you set up over the Morganton Road, quote, target project. When the county sent us the receipts off of that, they were $49 higher than we had anticipated based on the GIS property appraisal. So we do have to account for every dime in that because it is its own little separate taxing district. So it's just to make that $49 amendment.
And will
Taylor?
is it going to adjust every year, or is it going to be the $49 every year?
$49 every year.
we'll just see it
because
adjust
you'll-
every year.
Well, and there may be an adjustment every year, and it's probably likely because the reason it won't be $49 every year is that we hope there's going to be some things building over there. So the values are going to increase, and there's going to be estimates and things. And it just all depends on how much value the county ultimately puts against it, and then also what your tax rate is each year that you set on it.
And so this will be something that we see probably every January?
I think, Tess, maybe a little earlier than that in a normal year.
Okay, cool.
But,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you.
The next one, ordinance 2048, this, if you looked at the ordinance, you'll notice that we are reducing certain line items by the exact amount that we are increasing other line items. This is a GASB 87 issue, so it's totally Accounting Standards Board. It's totally the stuff that keeps Tess busy all day and up at night. I will just forewarn you that we're also working on GASB 96, and you will see a similar type of amendment in the coming months once we can work through all the details of that. But long story short, and please correct me, Tess, if I completely misstate it, they've essentially changed the rules on how we account for leases. What was looked at as a rent in the past, perfect example being a wireless communication tower on our water tower, is now being moved to elsewhere on the books. So it's just a reorganization of the same number of dollars within the budget.
And is that dictated by the state that we do that? Is that how that happens? Or does that, we decide to move it, and if so, for what reason?
We decide to move it in order to continue to be in line with General Accounting Standards Board, which then
Okay.
allows us to get those certificates of excellence
Okay.
and allows us to
Okay.
keep in bond markets and happy with the banks. And
Okay.
what am I missing in all of that, Tess, please?
It's just the rules for the accounting rules, and
Okay,
I'd like to change them to keep my life interesting.
okay.
The next one is some water plant work. It's Veolia, which some of you may remember as Suez. And if you've been here for a very long time, they've had other names over the years. But these are the contractors that operate the water plant. There were some significant projects that we had believed would be completed before the July 1 date of the new budget. They were not completed and therefore were not billed. So we're simply moving the money from last year that didn't get spent last year into this year's budget and capital project fund to take care of that. And then your final two items, you'll recall back in the fall when I came to you and we took some action relative to ARPA funds that essentially moved the money from those set-aside revenues into the budget in the name of salaries so that Tess can report properly in April to the federal government and we can close all of that out. We have now had enough months of salary pass that we're able to finish up the last $1 million or so of the ARPA funds, get those moved. That'll leave Tess prepared to file that report in April, and we will be officially done with ARPA relative to the federal government and its reporting standards.
Bookkeeping that's required, okay.
Exactly.
A document, you're keeping a document for us to keep track of what we've spent from ARPA and what we have left.
Just as soon as you decide to spend something from that,
haven't
we will
yet.
create that document, yes. But yes,
Ledger.
we will happily do that.
The ledger
Reagan.
is on one side right now.
And
Okay.
And then just as a reminder, you'll have your planning board appointment also added to this consent agenda that we discussed earlier in the meeting.
And thank you for those two who are meeting that person at the,
and
yeah,
then minutes will be added as well, right? I don't
Yeah,
think
we
the
met-
minutes were in our copy.
We met her, she was at the
whiskey.
whiskey brewery, approached us and had great interest in, and then we found out she lived in Highland Trails and that was ETJ. It's like, all right, there we go.
Perfect.
If Beth's got minutes planned for this agenda next week? Okay, okay.
I was like, I think
yes,
it's on the
those will
front
be
page,
added.
it just wasn't attached, so.
Got it.
Okay.
That's all I have this evening, other than just, I had mentioned a little bit earlier that budget season is upon us, and Tess has already been getting forms out, and I've already had calls from some directors with some questions. If there are specific projects or things you'd like to have us at least run some numbers on or take a look at ahead of that April agenda that we do, the sooner you ask, the more time we have to actually get some things together. So if you've got things in mind, please let us know what they are, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you for being here.
At some point, the contractor for the water plant, and just, I'd like to better understand why we're using a contract service. That doesn't have to happen now, just wanted to give you a heads up.
Absolutely.
You want the job? Sorry. Trash and water. All right. With that being said, I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Aye.
Aye.
Stay warm and
Yeah, no
return
worries.
all your warm garments and blankets back to Ann.
Considering they painted your nails in your cup.